Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. I am joined by Chief Bryant, our Atlanta Police Chief, Chief Smith, Chief over Atlanta Fire Rescue Department, and many others. As you can see, also Justin Johnson, our Deputy COO, Dave Wilkinson from the Atlanta Police Foundation. Last night, the Atlanta City Council took a very important vote. That vote was regarding taking the next step in creating our public safety training facility. I thank those members of council who were courageous in placing this vote and continuing to put public safety and the morale, retention of the men and women who serve us each and every day, putting this forward. There have been many questions as to why we are moving forward with this facility. And what I've said repeatedly over the last year is that holding the men and women who serve us in a public safety capacity accountable is not mutually exclusive from supporting them. And if you have ever had an opportunity to visit either the police academy or the Atlanta Fire Rescue Training Facility, they are simply deplorable. In fact, it's my understanding that the Atlanta Fire Rescue Training Facility was condemned last year. That's how bad it is. The Atlanta Police Department, there are no lockers for the cadets. The roof is leaking. It has mold. The list goes on. And in fact, Atlanta Public Schools left that building many years ago because it was not in the state that you would want to bring children in and out of each day. And so I just remind people that as we want the best, we want our officers and the men and women who serve us at Atlanta Fire Rescue to have a good attitude and disposition when they encounter us in our communities. It's important that we live up to that end of the bargain as well. We've talked about 21st century training, 21st century policing. You can't do that in subpar facilities. And I know there have been a lot of sensitivities, understandably so, about the location. This will be located at what's known as the Atlanta Prison Farm. The city of Atlanta has owned this property for over 100 years. We looked at several properties. I even put up several properties for consideration, but they were just not the appropriate fit. We have to be thoughtful about building this facility in a way that is considerate of taxpayer funding. Thankfully, we have some philanthropic support, corporate support that will give us to the tune of $60 million by the time it's all said and done, with another $30 million coming from the city of Atlanta. But again, I can't stress enough, it's not mutually exclusive. In the same way that I have asked for passage of legislation related to this facility, it's the same way I'm continuing to push for the transformation of our city jail, because we know that we cannot police our way out of the challenges that we are having in our city and across our country. We have to address those systemic issues that are leading to the outcomes that we are experiencing on our streets. So I, again, just want to thank the men and women of the Atlanta Police Department, Atlanta Fire Rescue, for the service that they give to us each and every day. We were just in this room a couple of days ago marking the 20th anniversary of 9/11. I mentioned I watched a documentary last week on how the men and women ran into the building. You all know the story. I saw another one last night. That story doesn't change. And the world got an opportunity to witness the sacrifices that these men and women make on behalf of us. But the men and women who are standing in this room today do it each and every day. And people have said we need to abolish the police and defund the police. Well, I don't know how you do that unless somebody is going to abolish crime. I know that when my house has been broken into, not once but twice, it's the police I call. When our family experienced a tragedy, these men and women who solved the case. When my son had a seizure, it was Atlanta Fire Rescue that showed up. When my son had an asthma attack, the paramedics, Atlanta Fire Rescue, that showed up. So this notion that we somehow cannot, or that we somehow can exist in society without public safety is simply ludicrous. But what we do want, and I want the same things you want, is for us to have positive interactions with the men and women who serve us. And I truly believe that the creation of this public safety training facility where we can train with the expectations that people will treat our communities with respect, that they will be given the most up-to-date training, not to serve as warriors in our communities, but to serve as guardians in our communities. So I thank our philanthropic partners, corporate community, the Police Foundation, and especially the men and women of Atlanta Fire Rescue and the Atlanta Police Department, who despite the circumstances and the setting in which they enter each and every day, that they continue to show up and to serve us with integrity. And then just lastly, I know during last night's city council meeting, you could hear protesters in the background from people showing up at people's homes protesting last night. And it's disturbing on many levels. I've had this experience at my home to have people throw taunts at my kids about them being adopted. And my husband said it best. He said, you know, when people do that, sometimes bad things happen to good people. So at the end of the day, we're all human. So if I get bad service at Dunkin' Donuts, I don't show up at your house yelling, berating your family. And thankfully, when it happened at my home, it was tough, but I didn't go outside and drag the woman in my yard like I wanted to do when she began to taunt my children. But you can't always expect that everybody's going to have that same response. So let us have a civil conversation about how we can honor the concerns and address the concerns of the community regarding this urban forest. We're not taking the entire parcel. There are hundreds of acres there. We are using 85 acres. There's still going to be an urban forest there. This is the beginning of a very long conversation on how we work with the community and make sure that we preserve as much as we can for community use. But I can tell you, for me personally, when you bully me and you try and terrorize me, it's the end of a conversation, not the beginning. And I'm going to assume that is the same way with the men and women on the Atlanta City Council and each and every other person involved in this process. Let us be civil with one another. We can disagree all day long. We had 17 hours of public comment. That is how you express your concerns. You email, you call on the public comment line, but you don't show up at people's houses when their children are home alone, as they were last night, or when they're caring for elderly parents. You're going to lose the conversation at that point, and that is not what we need to move forward as a city. So with that, I will turn it over to Chief Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for your leadership, City Council for their strength and support. the citizens of Atlanta for their faith in public safety, the men and women of the Atlanta Police Department for their fidelity, the men and women of Atlanta Fire Rescue for their commitment, the men and women of corrections for their steadfastness, and Dave, for your determination. We are here today to really champion and acknowledge the votes from last night for our Atlanta Police and our Atlanta Fire Rescue, now moving into a public safety training facility that will be representative of the men and women that come and work for this city every single day. As we embark upon 9/11, 9/11, September 11th, we now can look back on that date and learn from what we garnered during that time and train in that same fashion to protect our city in a much better way. We have called ourselves the Atlanta Finest, both at the Atlanta Fire Rescue and Atlanta Police Department, but for years, and I mean years, decades, have trained in substandard conditions. This will allow us to move forward, not just for the policing of today, and I know that question came up. What will this do for today? It will change the morale of the men and women of public safety. It gives us encouragement that not just this administration, not just this council, but the citizens of Atlanta really take public safety seriously. That we are now not just addressing something of today, but this academy will address the city of Atlanta for years to come. And so I think that I know that the vote last night has really transformed public safety in our city, that we can now look upon public safety in Atlanta as a place of change, not just for the city, but for the region. It wasn't easy, and I understand that, but no growth is easy. And so I think that what the council did last night really helped move us in a much better space. So with that being said, I want Chief Shearbaum to come and just speak more in depth. He was the project manager as it related to how we got into this space. And he too had a lot of sacrifices and a long night trying to work this thing out. So thank you, Chief Shearbaum.
Thank you, Chief Bryant, Madam Mayor. As everyone knows, training is the lifeblood of all first responders, be fire, police. The skill set our first responders exhibit and demonstrate to our citizens when they arrive didn't arrive with uniform, and it certainly didn't arrive with the vehicle that they drove to the call in. It's through training. Training as recruits, training throughout their entire career as firemen and police officers. Training allows us to deliver the services that every citizen expects when they call 911. And this facility ensures that we do not have a gap between that expectation and the services we deliver. This training academy will ensure that we no longer have to depend on neighboring jurisdictions to allow us to use their driving course, to allow us to use their training village, to allow us to use their drill tower. We will have a constant calendar of training for every community in our city. The first time we arrive to assist someone in a mental health crisis isn't a living room or a street. It is many hours of training. The first time that we stop an active shooter in our city isn't in a high-rise in Midtown. It is in training. And so for the leadership that's been shown to ensure that our men and women have that capability, that every citizen in the city can be proud of, is encouraging and was taken notice of last night by our first responders. This is a historic investment in public safety that will pay dividends in every community that we have by giving our men and women the tools to be able to respond to your 911 call effectively and in a manner that brings pride to the city, that reduces the use of force occurrences, that saves lives, and makes us the city that we are proud to be. So thank you to everyone that has invested in our training, giving us our men and women, the tools that we need to safely serve our communities. Thank you.
Good morning. I stand before you today as the Fire Chief of the City of Atlanta, representing the men and women of the Atlanta Fire Rescue Department, and I will tell you After the multiple phone calls, texts, well into the evening and early into this morning, they are very excited about this strategic initiative moving forward to build this public safety training center. I start by thanking our mayor and her staff for their relentless support of this public safety project, our partners with the Atlanta Police Department, as well as corrections, and those philanthropic partners that have supported this effort along the way. I stand here as a product of the training center that was called temporary over 29 years ago, and we have constantly reminded our members that this space is temporary. And as the mayor has mentioned, that space has now been condemned, as well as our training tower has been condemned. And we struggle daily with trying to determine how we're going to keep the men and women of the department prepared to respond to the needs of the city, as well as training those new members that we bring into the department. We go to straight extremes, to some extent, taking our members to Douglasville, Georgia, to train at the towers of our partners, just so that we can be prepared. So I stand here today saying to you that although it may not be an immediate impact, you have invested into the future of the public safety of the city of Atlanta. And as a citizen of the city of Atlanta, I am elated to know that we are moving forward to truly become the best in industry, the best in practice service department in the southeastern United States. And I say thank you again for your support, and we look forward to moving forward with this project. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Wilkinson, President and CEO of the Atlanta Police Foundation. What a great day in the city of Atlanta. You know, as we announce, the mayor announces the building of this public safety training center. I believe it's the most important security measure that this city could introduce in our generation. And as the chief said, it will have lasting effects to make our city safe for the next 50 years. And we could not be more proud of this. The mission of the Atlanta Police Foundation is very simply stated, and that is to create a safe city. We are the biggest fans of the police and other public safety. We also can be their biggest critics, just like you would be your kids. You want to make sure they do everything right. And the chief, this mayor, they do everything they can to make sure this police department is the best police department in this country, and we're proud to be part of that. I'd like to real quickly double down on what the mayor said about this training center and the fact that we're building this training center as a tribute to the community. This tribute to 21st century police reform, 21st century policing. And what I mean by that is your average police training center in this country and public safety training center would be fenced off in its entirety and the public would not have access. This training center is going to be built just the opposite of that. Well, the tactical areas certainly will be sequestered from the public, but the actual training center, the main building, the Leadership Institute, the classroom buildings, all of that will be completely open to the public. It will be the location where the public can come together with our public safety officials to discuss crime, to discuss public safety, to create public policy for public safety as we go first. And so I say to here today before you all that when we open this training center in just 2 years, in the fall of 2023, Atlanta will have created something no other city in this country has, and that is a training center that's not only best in class, first-rate training, best in the country training for our policemen, our firefighters, but it will be dedicated to police reform, dedicated to the public, and open to the public. And then lastly, I would just like to say that, you know, leadership matters, folks, and leadership counts. And I'd like to thank the mayor, the chiefs are in this room, this able command staff that we have around us, Justin Johnson and John Keene from the mayor's administration. There has been so many people that have spent 18 to 20 hours a day invested in this process. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention all the architects, the land planners, the engineers, the consultants that have all done this, by the way, over the last several years, helped to put this design together. And they've all done this, by the way, pro bono. We haven't paid anybody a nickel yet. So at the end of the day, I want to thank them for that, thank everyone for their leadership, and appreciate you all being here today to celebrate this great accomplishment for the city of Atlanta. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
I've got one for the chief. You haven't talked that much about recruitment, and I know APD competes with jurisdictions all over the state and all over the country to get police officers?
I'm glad you asked.
You know the rest of the question.
Yes, I'm glad you asked. One of the things that the mayor directed, not just the Atlanta Police, but her administration, is to make sure that we improve what we were doing around background and recruitment. So a lot of energy and revamping of what we were doing around background and recruitment has taken place. We monitor this regularly. The numbers are really improving, both in our ability to reach applicants, as well as just being slightly ahead of what we had anticipated as it related to recruitment. So I know that we are on a positive track in a very contentious field. As you well know, almost every agency in the state is understaffed and is in the recruitment phase, to the point that many are giving bonuses, signing bonuses, a place that many of us have not been. But I'm confident that even with this passing of this academy, that it'll give us the ability to attract even more applicants to our department, because they recognize that the people of Atlanta cares about public safety, and this is we're well supported, and so I'm confident that we'll be well ahead of our mandate set by the mayor.
Mayor Bottoms, there's been a lot of criticism about this process generally, including from some members of the city council. What would you say to critics of the way this entire process of approving the lease was handled? And what do you also say to, you know, a number of people in the city today who were very disappointed with this vote and felt like they mobilized but weren't able to have their voice heard by the city council?
I've not been a part of any discussions on any major redevelopment in the city where there's not been criticism on the process. We have shared what we know. We convened a group to make recommendations on a location, and it's unfortunate that we didn't have anything else to choose from, quite frankly. You have to have a certain amount of space. You have to have a certain buffer between communities when you're doing a training facility. And again, being thoughtful about taxpayer money. But this is just one part of the process. Remembering we shared this with City Council, I believe, in April. So this is not something that happened overnight. This has been several months in the making. And I know that everybody is not going to be pleased. There are many people who are unhappy about it. But based on my experience with leading the redevelopment over at Turner Field, the best way to counter that is to be true to your word and let your yes be your yes and your no be your no in terms of further discussions with the community on what this means. I know several years ago this location was envisioned in another way. But as we have had to readjust, we will make sure that the community is involved in those discussions. We'll have all of the appropriate people at the table, our environmentalists and people who have expressed concerns about the community. Those discussions will not end. We will just, it's not ever a pretty process. It wasn't a pretty process when we built the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It wasn't a pretty process when we redeveloped Turner Field. I don't expect this to be any different, but I do know that the outcomes of both of those redevelopments have been satisfying to the community, and that is what our goal will continue to be.
This is for the mayor or the chief. Those organizations calling to defund the police, many of them have said that it doesn't mean necessarily eliminating the police, but it means removing certain resources like so that they're not first responders when it comes to homelessness or first responders when it comes to people having mental health issues. In other words, reallocating those specific resources of the police, you know, and what's your stance on that?
Well, that's why we were considerate about how we allocated our city budget. And, Yeah, if I had my budget book, you would see a budget is this big. A city budget is a complicated process, and unless you are sitting at the table each and every day, a part of the budget process, it's often difficult or even easy for you to give simplistic edicts like defund the police. We are very thoughtful in how we use our funding. So, for example, with American Rescue Fund funding, as you all know, our advisory council has recommended that we use $70 million towards our violence intervention efforts and some of the other efforts that we've talked about to help address these systemic issues related to crime. It didn't mean that we had to take it out of our police budget, but what we did do, as you all know, is we reallocated money from our corrections budget because we saw that we didn't need as much funding and as much man and woman power in our corrections department. So there's a way to get it done, but for people who've not spent countless hours creating a city budget or examining the city budget and looking at it holistically, it's not as simple as saying take it out of this department and put it there.
This question is for you, Mayor Bottoms or Mr. Wilkinson. Why not postpone this until next year when there will be a new mayor and a new city council?
Well, when you are running a city, there are things that have to start today that will happen 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now. The Beltline was envisioned 20 years ago. The West Side Park was envisioned many years ago. So you have to lay the groundwork. A new mayor will have the opportunity to come in and put their fingerprint on it in the same way I've had the opportunity to do that with other projects that were in the pipeline. But this is something that can't wait, and I'm not going to put that burden on a new mayor. I know what it's like to come in into office and have to carry some weight on some things. So I think I owe it to the next administration to make their load a little lighter. There'll be some things that the next administration will have to carry some weight on for future mayors. So that's what a democracy is about.
Mayor, there's been a lot of talk nationwide about bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community. Can you speak to the importance of giving the public access to a portion of this space?
Well, Dave spoke to that. We're going to make sure that we preserve as much of the urban forest as we can preserve. Also, keeping in mind, we just cut the ribbon on the largest park in the city of Atlanta just a couple of weeks ago. So we're continuing to be very thoughtful of that. But again, in the space that's hundreds of acres, we are carving out a portion of that, and we're going to make sure that in whatever we do there, that the public still has access to those hundreds of acres while we use a portion of the property that we've owned for over 100 years.
Mayor, you talked about how this has become a public-private venture with a lot of support to make it happen and a lot of money behind it. Will you talk about why it was so important to bring in those private entities?
Yeah, we can't do it alone. We talk about this theme of One Atlanta, but public safety impacts us all. And as Chief Smith mentioned, 29 years ago, we had a temporary fire training facility that's now been condemned. That's how long we've kicked the can down the road. Again, you can take your cameras out to that facility. You can take it out to the Atlanta Police Academy. I'm not making it up. It's necessary. Our philanthropic partners, our corporate partners recognize that. And in the same way that they've come in and done things big and small for us, whether it be helping us do searches for leaders in the city or whether it be helping to buy the King Papers and build the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, it's not unusual in Atlanta. We call it the Atlanta Way. That's what Ambassador Young used to call it, the Atlanta Way, where we come together and we are able to get things done. And something of this magnitude, when you're talking about $90 million, it would be nearly impossible for the city to do it alone.